What we're going to learn today is a synopsis from our Rebbe about the Avodah of how Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim, and Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the Jewish New Year, the Day of Atonement, and the days in between, all together are drawn forth into the festival of Sukkot, however, in the frame of joy rather than awe. So, by means of introduction,
No.
By means of introduction, it seems to people that Tishrei is a haphazard month. It seems that there's like high holidays, which is all filled and it's awesome, but it's kind of joyous. And then we have Aseret Yemei Tshuva, which people are not sure what to make of it. Maybe it's like the in-between days because we got judged, and now we're going to get sealed, so we're waiting our court date. Certainly the days of awe and days of trepidation, even though we say that there's an element of simcha, an element of joy, that serves to undergird the entirety of Yom Kippur. And then a couple days go by, and then Mazel Tov, let's be happy, party time. Like what? How does one lead to the next? What does one have to do with the other? People who are taking off work every 2 days are frustrated, and they wonder, why couldn't we do this a little more economically? Why couldn't we kind of sprinkle the holidays a little bit in September, a little bit in October, a little bit in November? It'll be a little easier for everybody. Why does everything have to be packed together in the same month? And of course, nothing is haphazard in Judaism, especially not in Torah. And when the Torah tells us that B'Chodesh HaShvi, in the seventh month, you're going to have all of these festivals, there is a reason for it. Not only is there a reason, there's a rhyme, there's a reason and a logic behind it. So the biggest question, or the thing that seems oddest to people, is the days of awe, Yom Noraim, followed by days of Simcha, days of joy, because we know that Sukkot, even though every Yom Tov is supposed to be joyous, Sukkot is even more so. And we'll talk about that, B'ezrat Hashem, in some of our classes next week. So in this brief rumination, the Rebbe kind of traces all of the days that precede Sukkot and develops this idea in a very clear fashion that everything that happens in Sukkot is building to a climax. One leads to the next, almost like a domino effect. And the highest point of holiness is experienced through Simcha, is experienced through joy. Anyway, let's take a look inside the body of this text, and I'm sure you'll appreciate Tishrei in a new light when you finish this class. So the text begins by first noting that Chag HaSukkot bo la'achar ha'avodah da'aseres Yemei Tshuva. The festival of Sukkot comes after days of awe. Now, one could argue that they're all days of tshuva. They're all days of tshuva because it says Aseret Yemei Tshuva, 10 days of tshuva. Yom Kippurim is the 10th day of tshuva. That means the first day of tshuva is Rosh Hashanah, because otherwise it wouldn't be 10 days. Otherwise it would be Shivat Yemei Tshuva. It would be 7 days of tshuva because there are only 7 days in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim. And even in biblical times, very early on, when Rosh Hashanah was 1 day, it would still be only 8 days, not 10 days. But the fact is, it's called 10 days of tshuva. So clearly, 10 days of tshuva begins on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, concludes on the night of Yom Kippur, incorporates the week in between, but it's bookended by these awesome and holy days, but together comprise a single unit, the unit known as the days of tshuva. Koloima, kol ha'am shachas shel Aseret Yemei Tshuva. All of the spiritual actualization that takes place during the days of tshuva, boyim b'chag HaSukkos, they then arrive during the festival of Sukkot, ba'ofen, in a manner, u'bekav, and in a dimension of simcha. So that is to say, when we, the Jewish people, perform mitzvahs, it's not just quaint tradition. Something's happening. We're actually accomplishing something. The performance of a mitzvah is a hamshacha. It's an actualization. It's, if you will, drawing down holiness into this world. Our world is a vessel, a vehicle, a convention, an envelope for holiness. But you have to actually utilize it. You have to develop or draw forth the holiness into this world. Otherwise, it doesn't permeate our reality. It remains in cloud 9. And if things were to remain in cloud 9, we would not have a mission and a purpose. Who needs us? Who needs a terrestrial world? We could have angels doing what angels do. They do it better than us anyway, and then God would be happy. But that's not what God wanted. God wanted a dira b'tachtenim. He wanted a dwelling place in a world that would feel independent of God. Only our world can feel independent of God. Atheists can only thrive in this world. There are no atheists in Atzilus, or Bria, or Yetzirah. There are no atheists amongst the angels, or seraphim, or heavenly creatures. Only our world can actually allow for the possibility of full denial of the existence of God. And the Rebbeinu Shalom, God says, wonderful, that's where I want to be. I want to be where it's possible to deny my existence, and yet people should recognize that I am there, even though that the faculties they've been given, the five senses, do not assist them in discovering me. Nonetheless, they should use their heart, mind, and soul to seek me and to know me, and Hashem says, that's where I want to be. Now, to be sure, when Mashiach will come, we will know God with our five senses. It will become tangible, it will become actual. But in order for this world to become suitable or appropriate for such revelation, first we need the service in the time of darkness, which will eventually refine and elevate this world to the point that it is ready to be able to accept this lofty transformation. So it happens piecemeal, and very, very slow but steady transformation. It's like, people use sometimes medications to fight an infection, and it could take weeks. People use creams to fight a skin infection. It can literally take years until you're rid of the infection or rid of the illness. It's a very, very slow process. It's like molecule by molecule, atom by atom. Slowly but surely, we're conquering the reality that denies godliness and allowing godliness to permeate existence. And every festival is a special leap forward. A festival is like a surge of holiness. So the surge of holiness is effectuated in our world, even though we can't see it, through our observance of that festival. So all of the hamshachas, whatever we were able to effectuate and actuate during the days of awe, are now going to come through the prism of joy. So let's take a look. What is Aseret Yemei Tshuva comprised of? It's Yeshnam Beis Yemei Rosh Hashanah. We have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. We have Yom Kippur. A third day of these 10 days is the Day of Atonement. And then we have Shivas Yamim Shebein Rosh Hashanah Liyom Kippurim. We have the 7 days in between. V'chol Gimel Inyanim Elo. So all 3 of these segments, and they are very different. The Rosh Hashanah segment of Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the Yom Kippur segment, which bookends it, the climax of Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and Zayin Yomim Shebeneim, and the 7 days in between, are kshurim, are all linked. They're all connected to Chag HaSukkot. Okay, that sounds very interesting. Could you please explain that? How exactly is Rosh Hashanah connected to Chag HaSukkot? We don't blow the shofar. We don't spend half a day in shul. We aren't thinking about being judged per se. In what way does Rosh Hashanah, how do we see Rosh Hashanah expressing itself through a joyous frame, a joyous dimension on Sukkot? What's the connection? Doesn't seem to be a connection. So the Rebbe is going to be drawing on the vast reservoir of mystical Torah teaching. The Rebbe is going to synoptically show you how they're the cardinal or key element of each of these special days and their special avodah, their special service to Hashem that's expected of us during those days, actually comes together to form the foundation and the corpus of the essence of Sukkot. So let's talk about the Sukkah, which incidentally, that's the name of the festival. And name that Sukkah will be our class, God willing, next Wednesday. We'll talk about why is named Sukkot, why isn't it called Chag HaLulav or Chag HaEsrog or something like that, Chag HaMinim. But this is the fact. The fact is that it is called Sukkot, and the Sukkah itself is comprised of a floor. If you don't have a floor, you don't have a Sukkah. You can't float in a Sukkah. You need to have walls in the Sukkah, and there's specific halachas of what those walls need to look like. But the most important part of the Sukkah is not the floor or the walls, or certainly not your table or chair. What's the schach? That's the really important component. The schach has to be right. So the schach, in the word schach, which is the word that describes the covering of the sukkah, and we sit under a covering, under the shelter of the sukkah, is made of 3 Hebrew letters. Samach, and then a chaf, and then another chaf. Now the chaf changes in its written form. The second chaf is what we call a long chaf, or a chaf sofit, an end sof, because when you have certain letters in the Hebrew alphabet, they're written differently if they show up at the end of a word. But it's still the same letter. Chaf just written in 2 different ways. So what does that have to do with anything? Okay, so Sukkah is the primary overriding feature of the festival of Sukkot, and the schach is the single ingredient that perhaps has more weight than all the other ingredients that come together to form this marvelous reality and festival called Sukkot. The Rebbe says, why don't you add up the gematria of the word schach? Samach is 60. Chaf is 20. And then another chaf is Another 20. Okay, now let's think about this. The most important part of Rosh Hashanah is what? The blowing of the shofar. Some people think apple and honey, but really not. Really, it's the most important part is the shofar. So the shofar has to be blown a certain amount of times. And the proverbial idea is that the shofar has to be blown 100 times. How do you get 100 times? So you always have a tekiah, a long sound at the beginning, and you have a long sound at the end, and then the middle changes. Shvarim trua, shvarim. So if you do the counting, it turns out that you get shishim tekiyas, 60 long blasts, esrim shvarim, 20 shorter blasts, and then esrim truas, you have 20 shorter, this very short sounds, right? Because you have them in tashrat, tekiya shvarim trua, you have a shvarim and a trua, and then you have tashat and tarat, tekiya shvarim and then tekiya trua. So if you add them all up, do the math, you'll find out that you have 60 tekiyot, esrim shvarim, and esrim teruot, which this comprises the mea kolot, the 100 sounds, which we hear on Rosh Hashanah. So on Rosh Hashanah, our shofar blasts actually spell out the schach. Okay, direct link, Rosh Hashanah. So clearly there's a link between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. Let's talk about Yom Kippur. And we discussed this in great length in our class on Friday. Ikar Avedas Yom Kippurim huanan hakteris. The primary service of Yom Kippur is the plume or cloud of smoke. Now, let's be clear about this. The Beis HaMikdash is a very important part of the Jewish people's life and existence. Our rich Yiddishkeit experience in antiquity was very much temple-centric. In today's day and age, many of our prayers include all kinds of references and allusions to the Beis HaMikdash. However, on Yom Kippur, the Beis HaMikdash rose to the greatest prominence. That became the primary focus. And because it became the primary focus, in today's day and age, in a microcosmic way, the one day a year that Shul or Beit HaKnesset or Beis HaMedrash has the greatest prominence and importance is, of course, on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is today, there used to be something called 3-day-a-year Jews. I think it's more like 1 hour a year Jews now these days. And which hour would that be? It's called Nidre or Ne'ilah. But here's the thing. I meet people all the time and I say to them, you do Rosh Hashanah? Yeah, we do it at my sister's. I'm like, what, does your sister have a shul? They go, shul? What does that have to do with Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is a round challah. Rosh Hashanah is apple and honey. Rosh Hashanah is pomegranates. Rosh Hashanah is the head of a fish. That's Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is not shul. So people in their minds have unfortunately divorced the shul and Rosh Hashanah, and it's New Year's. It's Jewish New Year's. And, it's especially prevalent in Israel, but you got plenty of it right here in North America as well. So the shul, Nebuch, did not have mazel when it came to Rosh Hashanah. When it came to Sukkot, what's that? It's totally not mazel. Yeah, Hanukkah is kind of excited. People get excited about that, and that's a discussion for another day, but where's Hanukkah focused on? Definitely not the shul. Pesach, the single most observed ritual in Jewish life. Where's the focus? The Jewish home. But the one festival a year in which people still feel somewhat tethered to and pulled into a shul is Yom Kippur. We could do Yom Kippur to sisters. What are you going to do there? What are you going to do there? There's no eating. Okay, there's no eating and there's no boisterous fun. It must be shul. But this is really a handover from antiquity, because when the way things really were, the Beis HaMikdash, which was always an important place, was most important on Yom Kippur. Now the Avodah, the service in the Beis HaMikdash, is primarily the concept of offerings, korbanot. In fact, Rambam says, when he talks about the idea of the mitzvah of building a Beis HaMikdash, he describes a Beis HaMikdash as makom, a place, muchan, which is suitable for, prepared for, the avodah, the service of the korbanot. That's what you need a Beis HaMikdash for. You cannot have these activities without having a Beis HaMikdash. Ramban says it's a place for the Shekhinah, but really and truly, the Rambam and his idea seems to be more accurate, because ultimately we say that V'shachanti v'seicham, God's dwelling in a microcosmic way at least, takes place in every shul. And by extension, really in every Jewish home. And it's really b'seicham, it's really in everybody's heart. So Hashem is in every one of us. So you cannot say that the idea of Shekhinah is only in the Beis HaMikdash. You could say the most prominent form of Shekhinah, the most profound level of Shekhinah. But Shekhinah is everywhere. But korbanot, we don't get to bring little korbanot. Do not try that at home, ever. Like the korbanot are only for the Beis HaMikdash, only. And what was the primary focus in the Beis HaMikdash? Korbanot, the daily offerings. It was animal offerings, meal offerings. But all of those offerings were essentially burnt on the Mizbeach, and the emphasis was the fire and the manner in which they were consumed. There was incense on a daily basis, but that incense rises to the greatest of prominence when? On Yom Kippur. Because you'll see, I will be seen, or you will be seen in the Holy of Holies, which is the once a year, and the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies. That's the Anan in a cloud and a plume of smoke. The Isa Bedach, it's explained in Divrei Elikim Chaim, which is euphemism for Hasidic teachings, Shema Anan HaKteiris, that from the cloud of Keteiris, Nimshachim Anane HaKavod. That's what the clouds of glory that proverbially are represented by the Sukkah, that's what's created by the Zehuin and Chag HaSukkos. Remember, it's called Sukkot. The primary focus is the Sukkah, the shelter in which we dwell, and that sacred temporary shelter in which we dwell, that's a representation of the Anani HaKavod, the Shechina that sheltered us, that surrounded us. For those of you who attended Friday morning, or you can go back and watch it, the Rebbe develops that idea in a marvelous way based on the teaching of the Rebbe Maharash, that we say that the Sukkah has to be Tzilasa Miruba Mechamasa, that the Sukkah has to have more shade and less sunlight. And that is in perfect corollary with the idea of the Mizbeach, which has Eish, fire, similar to the concept of the sun, and then the Ketoret, which is like the clouds that block the sunlight. And we say that just like a whole year, there's much more fire and much less smoke. But on Yom Kippur, it's more smoke, less fire. So too, that idea of more smoke, less fire now filters into Sukkot, in which there's more shade, less sunlight. So this is how we see Yom Kippur, the Avodah of Yom Kippur, naturally, organically in a sense, diffused straight into the representation of what we celebrate during the course of Chag HaSukkot. So we kind of answered Rosh Hashanah. We explained Yom Kippur. Now we're going to move on to the 7 days in between. How are you going to do that? What are the 7 days in between and the Avodah of Tshuva? What does that have to do with the festival of Sukkot? It's a different kind of Avodah altogether. On the 7 days of Tshuva, we're carefully analyzing the way we lead our lives. We're looking at the things we do and seeing where we can make improvement. Whereas in the 7 days of Sukkot, what are we doing? We're celebrating, we're fabranging. We're saying L'chaim together. Very different. So the Rebbe says, look, Zayin Yom. In those 7 days between the middle days that are not Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, so they're rather ordinary or mundane, only kind of elevated, holier days, but really weekdays. So Yeshnam Kol Yimei HaShavua. If you have 7 days, invariably what do you have? All the days of the week. Yom Rishon, you have the first day of the week, because in Hebraic Jewish tradition, the days of the week do not have names. Only Shabbat has a name. Otherwise, it's first day of Shabbat, second day of Shabbat, third day. It's all leading up to the only day that really has its intrinsic definition is Shabbat. So we have first day, second day, v'chein halah, and so it goes, including all the days. We have a tradition, going back to the Arizal, that Yom Rishon, that the first day, Shebezayin Yomim, that the Sunday of these 7 days, Mitaken, is able to kind of retroactively fix or perfect or make right as Kol Yimei Rishon Shebachol Hashanah, all the Sundays. So all the Sundays that weren't the way they should be are tweaked or made better and enhanced and perfected by the Sunday of Aseret Yemei Tshuva. And then it goes the same thing with Yom Sheni, with what we call in the rest of the world today Monday. It fixes all the Mondays. In other words, the Zayin Yomim are about fixing or hallowing, elevating, redirecting, bringing into tshuva, into return, all the days of the week.
But that's the 7 days after Aseret Yemei Tshuva.
That is the 7 days of Aseret Yemei Tshuva. Yes, because Aseret Yemei Tshuva has 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and 1 day of Yom Kippur. How many days do you have in between them? 7 days. We've already demonstrated how Rosh Hashanah is directly linked to the Schach, as is Yom Kippur directly linked to the Schach. So how are the 7 days linked? So the Rebbe says that the same way we're able to elevate the 7 days of the week through doing tshuva and be more meticulous in our observance during those 7 days, Zayin Hayomim Shel Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 7 days then of the 10 days of tshuva, of those days of awe, Nimshachim Achar Kach are drawn forth afterwards, B'Simcha B'Zayin Yemei HaSukkos. Really and truly, the most important element in Avodas Hashem is not to be morose or miserable or long-faced, but rather to be joyous. And so, when a Yid rejoices with Hashem with his or her fellow Jews, with your Yiddishkeit. During the 7 days of Sukkot, what are you doing? Just as the 7 days are fixing the 7 days of the week of the past year, these 7 days, Mamshichim Simcha, are impregnating joy or bringing joy into Yemei HaShavua Shebechol HaShana Kula in the whole year that's going to follow. So Aseret Yemei Tshuva is this idea of elevating all the Mondays, all the Sundays, all the Tuesdays, and so on and so forth, fixing or making up for whatever was missing in the days of the week. This idea later is reflected into 7 days of Sukkot, in which we have Zman Simchasenu, and the opportunity to permeate or impregnate all the days of the new year with Simcha. You'll rejoice on the Wednesday of Sukkot, you'll have joy in all your Wednesdays. You rejoice on the Tuesdays, you have joy in all your Tuesdays. So we see the same concept of 7 days of the week, which correspond to 7 days of all those, each one of the 7 days, which we find in Aseret Yemei Tshuva. We have the same idea also in Sukkot, only in Aseret Yemei Tshuva it's in a way of awe, it's in a way of seriousness, and it's rectifying the past. In the days of Simcha, it's through joy, and it's forward focus going into the future. And that, my dear friends, is how we can find this stunning corollary and exquisite comparison between the parallels between the days of awe and the days of joy. And with this, I wish all of you and all of our listeners a Chag Sameach, a very, very happy festival of Sukkot. Hashem should help us. We should be able to celebrate with great joy. And hopefully, this will be the year that we reunited in the great Sukkah of David HaMelech in the holy city of Yerushalayim with the coming of Mashiach B'mheira U'Bimeinu Amen. Chag Sameach. Good Yom Tov.